2,000-year-old document exposes hidden truth of the resurrection. For 2 millennia, the story of the resurrection has stood like a blazing monument in the imagination of humanity. It has been proclaimed from pulpits, whispered in fear, defended in blood, and doubted in silence. It has given hope to the broken, courage to the dying, and provoked outrage in the hearts of skeptics. Yet beneath the hymns, the sermons, and the centuries of ritual, a question lingers like a shadow: what truly happened? Now imagine this: deep within the forgotten vaults of history, a manuscript surfaces. Its parchment is cracked, its ink faded, its voice trembling with both secrecy and power. A witness from 2,000 years ago, hidden as if in defiance of time itself, begins to speak. Its words do not soothe. They do not conform. They fall instead like lightning across the darkened sky of certainty. What this document reveals is not a mere confirmation or denial of faith. It is something far more dangerous. It whispers of truths concealed, truths woven into symbols, truths that present the resurrection not as a closed story, but as an open wound in the fabric of history. And when these secrets break into the light, everything we thought we understood and about life, death, time, and the sacred begins to tremble. If this vision shakes you, if it forces you to see beyond the surface, then join the conversation. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and leave a comment, because the story is not finished and your voice is part of it. The ancient manuscript they never wanted you to see. Why do certain words vanish into silence while others are exalted, enshrined, and passed down as sacred? Why does history preserve some voices and erase others, as though the act of remembering itself were an instrument of power? The existence of this manuscript, 2 millennia old, hidden in shadows, surviving against the long tide of erasure, confronts us with a question both unsettling and inescapable. Who decides what truth is allowed to live and what truth must be buried? For centuries, councils gathered beneath the banners of empire, bishops held quills dipped in the ink of authority, and emperors dictated not only the fates of nations but the shape of the very narratives through which humanity would understand its God, its Savior, and its eternity. They did not merely record history, they engineered it. They preserved the texts that served unity, obedience, and control, while condemning others as heretical, dangerous, or unfit for the faithful eye. Yet truth is not a prisoner of ink. It does not submit forever to chains of suppression. Like fire beneath smoldering ash, it waits, patient, unyielding, alive. And when it surfaces, when the forgotten page, the condemned sentence, the silenced witness emerges into the light, it does so not as a whisper, but as a flame defiant and uncontainable. This manuscript, left in shadow for 2,000 years, does not speak with the voice of empire. It does not bear the polish of creeds shaped for councils or dogmas designed for dominion. Its words tremble instead with the raw immediacy of memory, the shuddering breath of those who saw what could not be explained, who encountered what their hearts could not reconcile with the categories they were handed. In these faded lines we hear not certainty, but struggle. Disciples torn between faith and doubt. Visions that collided rather than agreed. Testimonies that fractured instead of unified. It is the record not of order but of chaos, not of doctrine but of eruption. The manuscript is shocking, not because it denies the resurrection, but because it unveils the event as something far more dangerous, far more destabilizing than the smooth proclamations of triumph would allow. It does not present the resurrection as a tidy miracle to be celebrated, but as a wound in reality itself, a rupture that left those who witnessed it staggering, speechless, trembling with terror. Imagine standing before the tomb, the stone rolled away, and the body gone. Imagine the silence of dawn shattered not by trumpets of glory, but by the pounding of your own heart, the unbearable weight of the unexplainable pressing against your mind. Did he rise? Was this a vision conjured by grief? A madness born from unbearable loss? Or was it something too vast, too incomprehensible for human reason to bear? The manuscript dares to suggest that the resurrection was not a single event neatly contained, but a cosmic eruption, something that tore open time itself, spilling eternity into the fragile frame of history. What was left behind were fragments, contradictions, testimonies unable to harmonize because no harmony could capture the immensity of what had broken through. It was as though reality itself had cracked, and through the fissure poured a light too blinding for mortal eyes to endure. The powers of history feared such rupture, for power thrives on control, and control demands clarity, certainty, singular narrative. Chaos cannot be domesticated. Mystery cannot be ruled. And so they sealed it. One gospel chosen above another, one account elevated while others were condemned, one version of truth declared acceptable while others were cast into shadow. They bound the infinite into words that could be preached, wielded, defended, and controlled. But the hidden manuscript burns against this containment. It whispers of the terror, the awe, the incomprehension that first surrounded the resurrection, not a victory safely defined, but an abyss into which human understanding collapsed. It reminds us that truth does not ask permission to exist. It does not bow before councils or empires. It is not contained in the hands of those who claim to protect it. Truth erupts. Truth resists. Truth haunts. And here, on these fragile pages, truth trembles back into view, not as certainty, but as a tremor, the aftershock of the infinite breaking through the delicate shell of the human story. What was buried could not be silenced. What was hidden now stands revealed, and in its revelation we feel again the vertigo of that empty tomb, the shiver of mystery that no empire could erase, the wound in time that continues to bleed into every age. Shocking clues buried in plain sight for 20 centuries. How strange it is, and yet how deeply human, that we can stand before the obvious and not see it, that we can recite stories with lips that have long grown numb to their weight, that we can turn mysteries into rituals so familiar that they lose their sting. For 20 centuries, the resurrection has been proclaimed from pulpits, painted on canvases, carved into stone, and sung in the trembling voices of choirs, and yet hidden within this repetition are details so astonishing, so unsettling, that their very familiarity has concealed them. The ancient manuscript does not invent these details. It does not fabricate scandal. Instead, it acts like a ruthless mirror, magnifying what was always there but left unexamined, highlighting what tradition sought to smooth over, and daring us to look again with unclouded eyes. One of its first revelations is silence. The silence of the women at the tomb, those first witnesses who, according to one of the earliest accounts, fled in terror and spoke to no one. Why silence, if what they saw was simple joy? Why fear, if what they encountered was only comfort? The manuscript whispers what we have long ignored. Perhaps their silence was not weakness but testimony. Perhaps they fled because what they beheld was not merely miraculous, but incomprehensible, a rupture in reality so severe that language itself failed, a vision so overwhelming that the human mind recoiled. Another clue lies in the contradictions themselves, those divergences between the Gospels that commentators have long explained away as perspective or emphasis. But the manuscript refuses such tidy harmonies. In one account, shining angels announce victory. In another, a gardener speaks in riddles. In another, fleshly wounds are touched by trembling hands. Are these discrepancies failures? Or are they fragments of something larger? Shards of a shattered mirror reflecting a light too bright for any single surface to contain? The manuscript insists that these contradictions are not errors but revelations. They reveal that what occurred was too immense, too cosmic, to be told in one voice. Each account is not an explanation but a fragment, and together the fragments point not to clarity but to mystery. And then there are the symbols we have tamed with repetition, the details smoothed into routine until they lost their strangeness. The stone rolled away. How often have we read this as a simple narrative element, an opening to enter the tomb? Yet the manuscript dares us to see it as something far greater. Not merely a stone displaced, but the tearing open of history itself, the collapsing of a boundary that once separated time from eternity, the opening of a wound in which the ordinary laws of reality no longer held sway. The empty tomb itself, too, is no simple absence. It is not a vacancy to be explained away, but a presence more terrifying than anybody could be. Absence here does not mean nothing. It means too much. It means that what has broken into history cannot be contained by flesh, cannot be reduced to sight or touch. It means that the resurrection was not the resuscitation of a body, but the collapse of categories themselves. Life and death no longer opposed, time and eternity no longer divided, presence and absence no longer distinct. For 2,000 years, these clues have been in plain sight, scattered through the very texts we have read and memorized. But familiarity numbs us, and habit blinds us, and so they became invisible. Now the manuscript holds them before us with merciless clarity. It insists that the resurrection is not a polished tale of triumph, not a miracle to be explained and filed away, but a philosophical earthquake, a shaking of the very ground on which we build our notions of truth, reality, and meaning. It tells us that what happened was not meant to soothe but to destabilize, not meant to comfort but to rupture. And in seeing these clues afresh, almost afresh, we are forced to confront not simply what happened 2 millennia ago, but what it means for us now. That the resurrection was not an event buried safely in the past, but a wound in the fabric of existence, still echoing, still trembling, still demanding that we look again at the very ground beneath our feet and admit that it is not as solid as we once believed. How this secret rewrite history's greatest miracle. What happens when a hidden text emerges from the shadows and dares to redefine the most central miracle in human memory? History itself begins to tremble, its foundations cracking beneath the weight of revelation. For 2,000 years, the resurrection has been framed as certainty, as dogma, as the immovable cornerstone on which empires built their cathedrals and kings forged their crowns. It was turned into a doctrine polished until it gleamed, a miracle domesticated into creed, an event transformed into the very architecture of power. But this manuscript tells another story, one that does not echo the certainty of power, but the fragility of awe. It does not speak of clarity, but of fragmentation, not of triumph neatly defined, but of a mystery so vast it overwhelms those who encountered it. Here lies the true danger, and here lies the power of this secret. If the resurrection is not a tidy miracle to be packaged, owned, and tamed, but rather a wound in reality itself, a rupture that bleeds into every age, then no empire, no church, no ideology can ever claim to possess it. It belongs not to power but to mystery, not to doctrine but to the infinite. Imagine for a moment the trembling of those first disciples. The manuscript paints them not as serene saints bathed in the certainty of divine proof, but as broken men and women staggering beneath the weight of something too immense to bear. Some saw visions that defied reason. Others fell into silence, unable to shape words around what their eyes could not contain. Some doubted. Some fled. What united them was not agreement, but awe, an awe that shattered their certainties, tore through their categories, and redefined the very ground of their existence. To rewrite history's greatest miracle is not to erase it, but to restore its danger. It was never meant to be safe. It was never meant to be domesticated into a doctrine recited like a formula, or wielded as a weapon in the hands of kings. It was meant to shake, to rupture, to burn. It was not a symbol crafted for empire. It was a crack in the world, a fissure through which eternity itself broke into time. And in that crack, in that unbearable fracture, light poured through, not the comfortable light of candles in sanctuaries, but the blinding light that strips illusions bare and forces humanity to see reality afresh. This, then, is why history sought to tame it. This is why councils turned fire into formulas, why emperors forged creed from chaos, why preachers clothed mystery in words that dulled its edge. For power can never coexist with rupture. Power requires control, and control requires certainty. The resurrection in its rawness was uncontrollable, indefinable, a terror as much as a hope. It was an abyss into which all human reason fell, a trembling in which faith and fear became indistinguishable. So history tried to domesticate it, to control it, to reduce it to creeds that could be memorized, to formulas that could be defended. But the manuscript lays bare what those formulas conceal, that the resurrection is not a puzzle to be solved, not a doctrine to be mastered, but a mystery unveiled, a haunting that refuses silence. It is not an answer, but a question that continues to reverberate across centuries, unsettling not only belief, but existence itself. It tells us that the greatest miracle in history was never a closed story, but an open wound, a wound that bleeds still, a wound that demands we confront not only what happened in an empty tomb, but what happens every time life defies death, every time light pierces darkness, every time eternity breaks into the fragile present. And so the manuscript does not diminish the resurrection, it restores its terror, its wonder, its infinite danger. It forces us to see it not as a relic of the past, but as an eruption that has never ceased, a rupture that continues to shake the world beneath our feet. The truth that could shake faith around the world. Why does this matter now? 2,000 years after the tomb was found empty, after voices trembled with fear, after silence gave way to stories that became creeds and creeds that became empires, it matters because truth does not die. It matters because the human heart, though dulled by centuries of repetition, still trembles when it encounters mystery. And this manuscript insists that the resurrection was never simply an event to be fixed in the amber of history, never a mere chapter in a sacred book to be closed and archived, but a living rupture, an echo that resounds through every age, an aftershock that shakes the foundations of reality itself. Its truth is not soothing. It is not the kind of truth that consoles us into sleep. It is the kind of truth that tears the ground from beneath our feet. The kind of truth that does not comfort but destabilizes, that does not explain but overwhelms. For believers, this truth is both gift and terror. It strips faith of the false security of possession and certainty, and it thrusts the soul into encounter with the incomprehensible. Faith, the manuscript reminds us, is not a trophy to be displayed, nor a fortress in which to hide, but a trembling posture before the infinite. It is not proof, it is not evidence arranged neatly in the halls of reason. It is surrender to a mystery that exceeds understanding. The resurrection in this light is not a final answer, but an unending question, a horizon that recedes as we chase it, a reality so vast that it redefines what it means to be human. To live in the shadow of the resurrection is to live exposed to be undone by awe, to walk with the unbearable knowledge that life itself cannot be contained by death, that meaning itself cannot be extinguished by despair, that eternity has already begun to bleed into time. For skeptics, this truth is no less disturbing, perhaps even more so. For to dismiss the resurrection as myth is to reduce it to something safe, symbolic, and containable, to file it neatly beside the legends of other ages. But what the manuscript reveals is not a myth woven to inspire, not a tale crafted to console, but a rupture that refuses containment. Myth is tidy, myth is ordered, myth is explanation disguised in poetry. This, the manuscript declares, is no myth. It is a wound. It is an opening. It is something that defies categories of true and false, real and unreal, history and dream. To confront it is to confront the very limits of reason itself, to stand before the abyss where logic falters and categories collapse. For the skeptic, this is a challenge that cannot be dismissed with a wave of the hand. It demands the recognition that there are realities too vast for rational grasp, mysteries that undo the boundaries of human thought. And for the world as a whole, the implications are nothing short of explosive. If the resurrection is neither the possession of the church nor the fiction of historians, but a cosmic eruption that breaks into every age, then it belongs to no one and to everyone. It cannot be owned by tradition, nor monopolized by dogma, nor dismissed as superstition. It is not the property of a single faith, but the haunting of all humanity, a tremor that runs beneath every culture, every philosophy, every attempt to explain what it means to live and to die. This is the truth that could shake faith around the world, that the resurrection is not a past event neatly sealed in the tomb of history, but a living rupture that demands encounter in every generation. It is not a relic to be venerated or dismissed, but a fire that still burns, a wound that still bleeds, a mystery that still calls. It is the intrusion of life where death should reign, the defiance of meaning where despair should dominate, the eruption of eternity into the fragile flow of time. And if this is true, then every human life, yours, mine, All who have ever lived stands under its shadow, its terror, and its light. For to live in the light of the resurrection is to live with the knowledge that the world is not closed, that death is not the final word, that despair is not absolute. It is to live with the burden of mystery, the weight of awe, the trembling awareness that the boundaries we cling to between life and death, between present and future, between human and divine, have already been breached. The manuscript does not allow us to hide behind the safety of explanations, nor the comfort of dismissal. It forces us to look again, to see that the resurrection is not merely history, but eternity pressing into history, not merely an event, but a question that demands an answer from every human heart. And the answer cannot be given with certainty, cannot be handed down by creed or erased by denial. The answer must be lived, trembling in the presence of mystery. That is why this truth is so dangerous, so destabilizing, so world-shaking. Because it refuses to die, refuses to be buried, refuses to be silenced. It is the wound that still bleeds, the light that still blinds, the echo that still resounds. And perhaps that is what it was always meant to be. Not a possession, not a doctrine, not a proof, but a haunting. A haunting that shakes not only faith, but the very ground on which all faith, all skepticism, all human meaning stands.